the planet have an authentic encounter with the person of Jesus Christ by the Holy Spirit by Pentecost 2033. And I love that as a dream. I love that as an idea. And this morning, I was just talking to a team of leaders here that are UK based, and we were just reflecting on how, as leaders, as faith leaders, we should posture ourselves in the realm of possibility and not just look at problems. And one of the things that I do love about Empower 21 and this really audacious vision of seeing the world turn to Jesus by Pentecost 2033 is that it's just filled with possibility. Anything can happen. And I know that in all of our local contexts, we all have our immediate challenges, don't we? We have obstacles, we have our problems that we're leading through and we're having to overcome. And sometimes I think what can happen is we can be so busy dealing with our challenges that our head can drop and we can become really focused on what we've got at hand. But moments like this gives us the opportunity to come up for a little bit of oxygen and dream together and believe together and hear from leaders who are actually paving the way for us in terms of what is possible in life, in leadership, and in ministry. And so really Empower 21 is about that in Europe, and we're so thrilled to be able to do that. A little bit later on in the call, we're going to get Stefan involved, and he's just going to share with us a little bit about the Pentecostal World Conferences coming up in Helsinki in June. And also a little bit later, we're going to tell you about our E21 Leadership Summit that we've got coming up in November in the beautiful Sicily, in Catania as well. And so we'll get ready for that. But before we jump into the interviews in about 7 or 8 minutes' time, we thought it'd be really good just to get a few updates in terms of what's happening in the world, especially in soul winning, in evangelism in Europe right now. There are so many really exciting things developing. And so I wonder if just for a moment, Jean-Luc, if you could just unmute for a moment, Jean-Luc, and just to give us a little bit of an update from your perspective of what's happening in Europe. Tell us about some of the things that you're involved in.
Well, thank you so much, Bishop Glenn. It's very good to be here with you guys. I really believe it's God's time for Europe. We have been waiting for that time since decades or even longer. And today, I think we are just seeing the first fruit of a massive outpouring of the Holy Spirit connected with the harvest. And that's the main thing. It's not just a visitation for churches, but it's really connected with this vision to reach everyone. Personally, I see that, I will not say every day, but for sure every week, thousands of people in different places coming to the Lord. If can go to some little village like where I'm living in the countryside of Switzerland, we are seeing almost every day people getting saved for sure. Every church service, it's overpacked, mainly with young people who are giving their life to the Lord. Going to other places, we are very involved with this healing movement as well. I see that to different places like Geneva, amazing what the Lord is doing there. In Italy, that's fantastic. I just came back from Köln in Germany. We just sold out, packed out the place with 1,700 kids. Actually, it was more than 2,000, but for the security, we went for 1,700 on the communication. We had to take off the chairs just to put the people sitting next to each other. Amazing. And like 50% of them never heard the gospel, gave their life to the Lord. A lot of deliverances. People are so addicted today. And it's happening in so many places. So we are very encouraged. And the thing is, today we need really to come together in unity to help each other. Please, the church planters, we need you more than ever, because people get saved, but we need to disciple them. So we need to be sure that the harvest will longs for the long time. So God bless you.
Jean-Luc, thanks so much for the update. Brilliant. And it is exciting to see what's happening across Europe. You know, they're saying in Britain at the moment, sales of Bibles in Gen Z are absolutely rocketing. They're up 200, 300%. Our national newspapers, our secular national newspapers are reporting that Gen Z are more open to God than previous generations. It feels like, there's a little bit of a tipping point right now coming to Europe, and we've all got a part to play within this. Jean-Luc, you talk about church planting. It is so true that we need to be planting churches, don't we? I did some mathematics yesterday and worked out that in our movement of churches, just our movement of churches, a global movement that I belong to called the Assemblies of God, that if every Assemblies of God church plants a church every 3 years itself, then within 33 years, every neighborhood in the world will actually have a spirit-empowered church that has the name of Assemblies of God in it. And that's just the Assemblies of God stream. If every spirit-empowered charismatic stream got involved with church planting, then who knows how quick we could truly see the world turn to Jesus. It would be really, really remarkable. They say that church plants, a new church gets 60 to 80% of its growth in the first 3 years through new converts. Not people returning to faith, but first-time salvations. That's a global statistic. Whereas older churches tend to grow through transfer growth. And so, we're after souls, aren't we? That's what this is all about. And so we need our evangelists out there, priming the ground and getting things ready. But we need the pastor shepherds who are actually, going to be discipling people as well. And we need the combination of those things happening in Europe. Let me just throw to Magdalena and Zibi for a moment. Guys, I know this weekend you're running a church planting summit in Krakow in Poland. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about what's happening in Poland at the moment?
I think the greatest the picture is like what you said, that for many years I think that most of the leaders, they see the problems, but I think now it's the changing the language that actually see the obstacles. It's not the obstacles, it's like how can we work out, what can we see, how we can change the language, how can we rewrite the history. So I think this is kind of like a meeting the older and younger generation, that it's probably that's the missing out in the conversation and in the communication, that actually both different generations, that you have a heart for reaching out, but actually it's misunderstanding. So I think bringing hearts together is just bringing a passion, and we see this happening. So we thought that it's a hard grant, but actually when you start speaking faith, the hearts are open and you start seeing new grants and the new fields. So for us, it's pretty exciting to see that, that the people are talking more about church planting, and just, I think it's, again, step by step, but I think it's a kind of a look in the long term. You see that there's something great is happening.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, mate. I appreciate that update. Okay, everybody, we're going to jump into our interview now with Bishop Henry, and we want to spend some time. We've got a good 30 minutes set aside with him. I'm going to prime him with some questions, but if you have any questions that you would like to ask or you'd like us to come to, then please do put that in the chat, and we will do our best to pick up on some of those questions. We probably won't be able to do all of them, but we'll do our best to get through some of them. Bishop Henry, we're going to spotlight you, so you're on screen, so you can be seen by everybody. Firstly, we want to say to you, Henry, that we are praying for you, and we're praying for the nation of the Ukraine. Right now, we're obviously continuing to pray for, Russia as well, and for a speedy end to the hostilities. This has been our prayer for 3 odd years now, and we continue to pray that God will work miracles, and God will really turn things around. And of course, we are hearing news reports at the moment. It's hard to know what to believe, that there is a potential, peace coming at some point soon. So we really are praying that God would continue to protect you, and peace would certainly come to your nation. And at the end of this interview today, Henry, we want to pray for you, and we definitely want to pray for the nation of the Ukraine as well. But Henry, I wonder, could you please just give a snapshot of your journey to this point? Tell us about where you were born and how you got to where you are and what you're doing. Could you do that in the space of 3 minutes? That would be wonderful if you can.
Yeah, thank you very much, Glenn. By the way, I'm not a bishop yet, and I'm not planning to be one. So I was born in Zimbabwe. Well, when I was born, the country was called Rhodesia then. That was in 1965. That means I just became 60 years old a few weeks ago. I grew up in the city of Salisbury, which became Harare eventually. When I finished my A-level being a British system of education, I got into the local, okay. So I got into the local university to study pharmacy, which I did not want to do. Then I got a scholarship. I was very physics, mathematics oriented kind of. So I got a scholarship. I got a scholarship to study aeronautical engineering. So my background is engineering. So when I finished my master's of science in aeronautical engineering in Kiev in 1993, that's when I graduated. And the church had just started December of 1992, the Victory Church. So when we started the church, we grew. Our church was 200 people when we started. And we grew from 200 to 30 people. That means we added minus 170 people in 6 months. And I was in a crisis. I was seeking the Lord, what do I do next? And the Lord told me to do 3 things, and the church will grow. Number 1, he asked me to pray for the sick, and that's what I've been doing ever since, emphasizing the supernatural, not on the evangelistic field, but in the church itself. Number 2, he told me to simplify, take the difficult things, make them simple, so even kids will understand. And number 3, teach the Bible topically, topic by topic. And that's what I've been doing all these years. So the Victory Church was started in 93. It has grown. We have planted churches all over Ukraine and beyond. And now, during the war, we lost maybe 60% of our church members in the church. They all went to Europe. But in the meantime, we had more than 50,000 people who got saved during the war only in Kiev. 150,000 people across Ukraine. And so there's been so much evangelism going on, but this is not from the evangelistic point of view, but from an apostolic leader approach to evangelism, which may not exactly be the evangelist approach to evangelism. So, and now that's where we are. I guess I did it in 3 minutes.
Well done. I appreciate that. Henry, you are definitely not only leading a church, but you're definitely a statesman in the Ukraine, to the people of the Ukraine, and certainly around the world. And it's fascinating that you used the phrase a moment ago when it came to building the church back in the 90s. You said, the Lord told me. So if we think about you right now leading in a country that's at war, what is the Lord telling you? And what are your priorities right now as a Christian leader in a country at war?
Being in a country of war and being a Christian leader sometimes that sounds like antagonistic positions, so to speak. So, and I would say, I guess the first week of the war, which was the 24th of February in 2022, it was very, very early in the morning. So everybody was kind of frightened. We had no idea what was going to happen. Everybody was, we were not sure what was going to happen. Were we going to die or were we going to live? So, and one of the things I thank the Lord for was the many different preachers from all over the world who would call me and would pray together. And what the Lord helped me to do was, number one, stay focused on your vision. Because the emotional part of being attacked by a much more powerful nation like Russia was very difficult to take. And you tend to get emotionally boiling inside and being at a loss, depression, you don't know what to do. So the Lord said, stay focused on your mission. And that's what I did. So I stayed focused. There was nobody in the church, but I would preach in Zoom or through the Zoom link. And sometimes I would preach in the church and broadcast it on our television channel, the VCTV, our Victory Church television channel. Sometimes the explosions would be louder than me speaking in the building. So I would stop a little bit so the explosions die down a little bit and then continue. So that's how I stayed focused. And when I stayed focused, I protected my emotions and my emotional being. I had to protect myself by staying focused on preaching and reaching out. Number two, I was listening to the Lord on what actually I should do during the war. That's when the Lord gave me this project called There is Hope, Help During Times of War. And when we set this project in motion, we helped maybe almost 1 million people across Ukraine. This is giving them clothes, giving them food, giving them accommodation. But we emphasize preaching the gospel always. That's our ministry motto in the Victory Church. Everybody in the church is a minister. Everybody has to speak the gospel. So we don't know what it is when people don't tell other people about Jesus, because that's our norm. And as a result, so many people began to come to Jesus. And I was bringing the people to be involved also to help them not to be overly emotional over the news they hear on a daily basis. When they are busy helping other people, they are busy getting people saved. Emotionally, they're a little bit detached from what's happening around them. That was like a healing moment for them, for their souls as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you so much. And the correlation between the spiritual war that we find ourselves in as church leaders, as Christians, versus a physical war that you're finding yourself in as a nation right now are great. So what are the similarities between both the spiritual unseen war and physical war that you find yourself in as a nation?
There are great similarities, and I think some of them are very unexpected. Like in any war, sometimes you're winning and you feel good, and then 1 week later, you are like losing and you don't feel too great. So, and number two, what I've realized was sometimes you have a friend who is your biggest support, and then in 3 weeks, he says, now I'm your enemy. I mean, he changes sides. And I think when that happens, it's so disheartening sometimes. And that's when I realized that, wait a minute, we have to trust in the Lord instead. Because many Christians, they were getting sidelined, and without noticing, I think some of the nations that were helping us were becoming our saviors, so to speak. So that complete trust in God is always helpful when you're doing spiritual warfare. Whatever happens, whatever the circumstances are, stay basing your security on what Jesus did on the cross, the blood that was shed, and the Holy Spirit with us. So if things are for you, around you, great. If they are not, nothing has changed. Jesus, his blood, his death and resurrection, they are still true. So I think that moment, and never trust in people too much because they change sides very unexpectedly.
Wow. I mean, that's fascinating insight and observation, Henry. Thank you for that. Let's just pivot a little bit towards, engaging in public life then, because in many senses, it's one thing engaging, on the platform as a preacher, but you oversee, you've seen 150,000 people come to faith in church. You oversee a network of churches, but you're also engaged in public life. Let me ask this question then. How has your faith influenced the way you engage in public life?
Well, that's a very good question, because I think my faith is the backbone of everything that I do. Now, the context. I'm living in Ukraine, where my skin color is like, like one little boy was saying, you are like a walking museum. so, so I'm a walking museum. And then number two, the spiritual climate is very orthodoxy. And everybody else outside of the Orthodox Church is a sect. They call them sects. And that's officially on government level. And here you are you're a walking museum, and you are trying to change the system. And that's a double, how would I say, a double confusion for the people. So I would say, and number three, Ukraine, because of the former Soviet and communistic part, there was quite a big or a huge number of atheistic viewpoints in the country. So you have the orthodoxy, you have the wrong skin color, and you have the atheism not on your side. So what I realized very quickly was my best option is to hold on to Jesus as much as I can and engage, starting from the days when I was a student and all the way to now. I I rally our people in the church that their ministry is not just within the church, it's well beyond. So I go with them to where they go in what they do. So many times I go into these public spaces because of the people that come to church. And I encourage them to use their platforms, and I will come and help them. So I remember it was very funny when one of the guys in our church, he was doing these exhibitions for medical equipment. And he invited the president of the country. His name was Mr. Kuchma then, the Speaker of the Parliament. He invited the Minister of Health, and he invited me. Now, if you can imagine the setting, he is this black guy. He's going to officiate this whole thing. And the president and everybody, they were told the preacher is coming. They thought it was an Orthodox priest. And here I come, no beard, nothing. I mean, just standing there. So what they didn't realize was I was sweating as can be under my suit because I was very intimidated. And I felt myself like an imposter in the situation. And so what I did was, in spite of the sweating, in spite of the imposter syndrome, I got hold of my Bible, I began to speak. And after a few minutes, everybody forgot I was black. And I think that's the whole key. Stay focused with what you are, what you have. And as a result, I've been able to help so many politicians, many figures in the country, because I have taken my faith out of the church building into the society wherever I can, and eventually people get to know they can get help from Jesus through me or through people in the church.
Henry, that's fantastic. I love that feedback. Thanks for your thoughts. Now we're gonna shake things up a little bit in this interview. Lord Rook has joined us. They had a change of situation in Parliament down there, And so Lord Rook will be going back into the chambers in half an hour's time. So we're going to have a three-way, and if we can get Jamie on this common call as well, we'll get Jamie in to have this conversation. But firstly, Reverend Lord Russell Rook, welcome to the call. In the UK, we use spiritual names first, so you're Reverend before your Lord. We have Bishop Henry Madava from the Ukraine. He says he's not a bishop, but he is. Then we've got Jamie, who's a gangster from Dublin, on the call as well. But firstly, Lord Rook, what do you have to do to become a lord in the UK, and what does that mean?
Well, please call me Russ Glynn, as you know. I have these American friends who deliberately get their little kids to call me by titles just because it annoys me. But yes, no, I'm Russ. My official title is Lord Rook. I'm not quite sure. To be honest, I think one of my old bosses always used to say that her career was only a career if you looked backwards. There was no way of making it sense going forward, and I think that's probably true with ministerial and vocational careers as well. Basically you follow Jesus, and he leads you somewhere, and hopefully you're responsive and obedient, and you join him there. I didn't ever expect to be a member of the House of Lords, and I only became a member of the House of Lords on January the 23rd, and so I'm still getting used to it, and it's very weird. And you can even see just the building, the room that I'm in. The whole place is slightly overwhelming. What does it do? The House of Lords is the upper chamber, but it's actually the less powerful chamber in the UK Parliament. So we are a scrutinising chamber, and so largely laws are made by our elected members, the members of Parliament in the House of Commons, and then the House of Lords looks at those laws and legislation and scrutinises it and tries to make it better. And I'm very sorry. Today has been a crazy day because there were some issues going on, including some issues in Ukraine, which required extra statements. So all the day got messed around. And then when we just thought we got the timing sorted out, something very rare happened. There was a protest in the House of Lords. People started chucking bits of paper over the gallery, and they had to clear the house and get rid of the protesters and start all over again. So it's been a bit of a mad day, and it's been difficult to judge when I need to be in and out of a debate. I've just come out of a debate where I was speaking about the importance of freedom of religion in Europe, and particularly about the European Court of Human Rights. So that's as much as I know. If you get me back in a couple of years' time, I'll tell you more about the House of Lords. But I'm basically learning as I go at the moment, Glyn.
Well, Russ, thanks for joining us today, and appreciate you jumping on this call in the midst of a busy day. We were saying at the beginning of the call, the only way really to get anything done is to ask busy people to get involved, because we haven't got time to mess around. Yeah. Russell, I wonder if in 2 or 3 minutes, just talk to us a little bit about your journey, where you've come from to the fact that now you're a Lord in the House of Lords. Where have you come from? How'd you get here?
Well, I am too a product of the holiness movement, not of a Pentecostal church, but of the Salvation Army. And so I grew up in the Salvation Army in a place called Southsea on the south coast of England. And I guess in some ways that's almost all you need to know. The Salvation Army has a kind of outwardly, the Salvation Army faith is a public faith. So my earliest memories of faith were marching up and down the seafront, blowing a trombone, holding open air, evangelistic services, helping people in the community who needed care, because the Salvation Army is very much about the last, the least, and the lost. And so my experience growing up was about very active, a kind of one of my mentors always used to say, the Salvation Army is spirituality with its sleeves rolled up. And for me, that's the faith that I grew up in, which was deeply personal, deeply spiritual, but also deeply public, and always had a kind of external implication. If God was doing something in you, that means you needed to do something outside for him. And so I was in the Salvation Army. I worked for the Salvation Army for 18 years. After I graduated from school, I looked after Salvation Army's youth work in the United Kingdom, and I helped to lead an international spiritual renewal and mission movement called Roots. And then from there, gradually, I found my way into politics. At first, because one of my closest friends became a member of the House of Lords, and was not sure that they were going to be able to do that well and faithfully as a Christian. And so I just volunteered to be around and be their friend and join them. And so at first I came to volunteer for a lady called Baroness Sherlock, and then over a period found myself increasingly involved in trying to connect these worlds of faith and politics the church and politics, often by identifying issues in the world where the church could make a real difference, or helping politicians to think about the importance of churches and what churches do. And it sort of went from there. And then my final assignment was, for the last couple of years, I was seconded to Sir Keir Starmer, who's now the Prime Minister here in the UK, as a faith and civil society advisor. And now I'm here.
Amazing. And thanks for what you're doing in the office that you hold in terms of representing, firstly, Christ to this generation, in a sense, holding our politicians to some level of Judeo-Christian values and reminding them all that Jesus is alive in that space. Appreciate that. Jamie, I'm just going to ask Lord Rook a question, and then feel free to ask him a question as well. Henry, stay on the call. We just want to maximize this moment with Russell for a few moments. So I just want to ask you, Russell, I'm not sure if you heard Henry a few moments ago, but I just want to ask you the same question. How has faith influenced the way you engage in public life?
Well, I did hear Henry earlier on, and was massively inspired. And so I'm not sure that I've got anything. I've certainly got nothing as inspirational as that to contribute to the story. I mean, for me, my public life is about faith. I should have said also at the beginning, I'm an Anglican priest now. I'm what's called a minister in secular employment. When I went to my spiritual director to say that I felt I might be called to ordination, he said, we'll have to find out what kind of ordination that is, because I don't know if you could run a church, but you could definitely kill one. And he's absolutely correct. And so I'm ordained for this public life of working in politics. And for me, interestingly, when I chose to become ordained, I thought that I was closing the door on ever being involved in politics. But actually, what interestingly happened on the other side of that ordination was God opened the door, and has increasingly opened more and more doors than ever before, to be present here in public life. And I do that as a priest. So I'm not a priest for part of my week. I'm not a pastor for part of my week. I'm not an ordained minister for part of my week. Just on Sundays when I'm leading church services in my congregation, I'm there throughout the whole of the week. And so for me, there isn't any part of what I do which isn't sort of faith driven. That doesn't mean I get everything right by any stretch. But actually the reason to be here is because Jesus led me here, and I'm desperately trying to be faithful to him in it.
Amazing. And Jamie, I'm going to do a follow-up question on this, and then I'll come to you. But Russ, in terms of you expressing your faith in public settings now, that you've been effectively living and working in the Westminster area for quite an extended period of time. How do you express your faith in public settings when you are finding a real pushback against your orientation as a Jesus-centered, Bible-believing follower? What do you do in those settings, in those moments?
Well, the first thing I would say is I think it's actually, I don't have any, it was fascinating hearing Bishop Henry talk about Ukraine and the context there and the backdrop of atheism and the current challenges. I can't even imagine how you do that in that situation. I think the first thing I would say is my first job for the Salvation Army was as an evangelist. And I think it's become easier, not harder. So I started out working with lots of young people, particularly generations of young people who were often forced to go to church, though they didn't want to go to church. And so they had all this kind of anger and bitterness and frustration and baggage around Christian faith. I think we're working in a more secular context now, but I think in often cases, that means that people are actually more open and they're more interested, because they don't actually know a great deal about what Christian faith is about, or the life of Jesus, or the gospel, or what the church does, or why we do certain things. And so I have to say that most of the time, pushback is rare. There are moments where there's pushback, and that tends to be in areas where you've got very secular policymakers who are either slightly religiously illiterate, they don't really understand faith, or they're nervous that actually, we're all weird, we believe in God, that means we've all got three heads and a very kind of ulterior motive. And there is some of that. There is some of that suspicion around faith. But in the meantime, I don't find that difficult to challenge, because we have every right to challenge it. I live in a country where there's an established church. I'm a priest in the Church of England, and so church and politics are the sort of two pillars on which our society is built, whether you like it or not. So I don't find it difficult to push back. And what I do find increasingly is people want to hear the story. And actually, when you tell your story, so for me, I gave my maiden speech in the House of Lords last week. where you have to slightly talk about the topic of the debate, but mainly you're there to tell your story. And my story is a story of faith. It's kind of like a testimony. And I think people like hearing people's stories, and there's something that's much harder to feel negative about and much easier to start conversations off the back of. And so for me, I think it's about just being authentic and talking about who I am and the role that faith has played in my life, and then seeing kind of who wants to talk more about that.
Yeah, love it. Thank you so much. Jamie.
Yeah, wonderful. I want to echo just Glenn's appreciation and welcome Russell to the call.
Thanks.
We do two of these a year. One is more on the apologetics front and the other's on leadership. So I will ask you a leadership question in a moment, but I was thinking from an apologetic perspective, if there was an atheist on this call looking for evidence of the existence of God, it's got to be that an Irish Republican with the Proclamation of Independence from Ireland interviewing a lord in the House of Lords with a painting of a monarch behind him, and that we call each other brothers, which is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. So great to get to hear your story and your passion for the kingdom. So what part of your story is, like you said, you grew up in the Salvation Army, and that informed and shaped you as a person and how you carry out your ministry in politics. So given that most people in the call are leading churches, whether it be pastors or ministry leaders, what from your experience advice would you have for us, what we can do to help shape and empower our people to better engage with our nations and our context, the political sphere?
So I think it's a brilliant question, and I haven't written many books, and most of the books I have written aren't very good. So it's unusual for me to reply, read my book. However, myself, a guy called Sam Wells, who's a vicar at a church called St. Martin in the Fields, and my colleague at Good Faith Partnership, David Barclay, wrote a book some years ago called For Good, which is precisely about this issue. So I think very succinctly, the first thing is I think local congregations and local churches have to know what they're called to. You know, you're not called to change everything. You're not called to absolutely, you're not called to transform the education system on one hand and then sort out homelessness on the other side and then end the global migration crisis and bring an end to global warming. You know, churches almost have to know, okay, so God, which part of this kind of public mission field of changing the world, of being parts of the heralds of new creation have you given to us? And where are we going to be working? What is the gift that you've given? Because those things, whether it's about transforming the lives of disadvantaged young people or dealing with mental health in your community, that's God's gift for you to be involved in that. So what is the opportunity that God is gifting you firstly? And then I think secondly, you have to decide, and what can I do? There's lots of different ways. I mean, I love the fact that in the Old Testament, you've got lots of prophets, but they all have different styles. Isaiah has a different style from Jeremiah, has a different style from Amos. They all have a different approach to the way they do politics. Some work with rulers, sometimes some work against rulers. And so I think the second thing is once you know what you've got to do, that this is the thing that God has given you to have an impact on, then secondly, how are you going to do it? But put very simply, in our book, we say there's 5 things that churches can do. They can contradict. Sometimes that's important. Calling out the powers and saying, no, this is just not right. And what we're going to do is we're going to campaign. We talk also about contrast, sometimes about saying, okay, the government is doing this, but we feel something else is needed. So we're going to work in this area. Then there's the middle one is complement, right? Okay, well, the local authority or the local government is running this program and we think that's good, but we think we can run something alongside them as partners, which adds an extra dimension that only the church can bring. And then there's collaborate. So it might be the case that actually you want to work with local government and run a service, take on a program. I used to work for an organization that ran schools and health centres with government and local authorities. The last one is the one which we're not very keen on, which is co-option. Which is when the church becomes co-opted by the state and just becomes an arm of the state. And that's the only one where we couldn't find any positive examples. So it's a very short chapter. But I think it's knowing where God's called you. What has he gifted you? What's the opportunity he's gifted you? And then saying, well, which one of those 4 do we need to do? Are we on one end of the spectrum when we're really campaigning social justice, change, or actually might be on the other side of the spectrum where we're saying, right, we want to work with the government and deliver something. And then there's various things in between. So knowing what God's calling you to and knowing what kind of style and position and posture you want to take to deliver that in your community and context.
That's wonderful. And I think Adam threw the link for the book in the chat there. Obviously, when did it become obvious to you, Russell, that you had a passion or a call for politics in particular? Obviously, you've always been involved with living out your faith, like you said, with your sleeves up. But when did it become clear to you or obvious to you that actually it's more political?
It's really interesting you say that, because I wanted to be many things. I wanted to be a brilliant evangelist. I was an okay evangelist. I wanted to be a brilliant youth worker. I was an okay youth worker. I wanted to be a musician. I was a terrible musician, so I retired due to letters from music lovers everywhere. But I sort of slightly stumbled into this world where I think actually I do have some gifts, and I'm not brilliant maybe, but I think I do a decent job. So I think partly it was about learning about myself and that kind of journey of discipleship and self-awareness. I talked about my spiritual director earlier. I've been working with him for 15 years now, and just learning more about who I am and who God's called me to be. I think that was really vital. But then I had early senses kind of I loved Yes Prime Minister as a kid, and for a while I thought I'm going to be a politician. And then I loved The West Wing when I was a bit older and thought maybe I should be a politician. So there were lots of things that sort of triggered me. And the Salvation Army is quite a political denomination, so you're always involved in those kind of issues. And I've got a big mouth and I like arguing, so that helps in terms of politics. And I'm okay at selling things, and politicians sometimes need to sell something or sell a vision. So I can see over time how the sort of pieces came together, but I think that the main thing for me has been has just been that understanding over time of just how God has made me. And I love, there's a lovely book by Parker Palmer. This is a book that I didn't write, called Let Your Life Speak. And Parker Palmer's point is that often we spend our whole life waiting for God to speak to us. But actually, if we listen to our lives more, we would find that he's spoken to us a lot already. And I think if you listen to my life, again, if you take my life and go backwards and listen to it, you probably discover that I don't know if I was ever always meant to be in the House of Lords, but I think I was always meant to be doing something similar to what I'm doing right now as a priest, but in a political space.
Wonderful. And the reason why I asked that question to set up is to say, if we have obviously a big part of um, prophetic prayer for years has been praying for various, areas of society, areas of influence, especially government. So as church leaders, denomination leaders, how can we cast a vision or empower or encourage young people to see what you're doing in your country as a viable and needed part of ministry in our respective nations? What advice would you have us to kind of cast that vision and maybe speak into people to encourage them along a pathway similar to yours?
So I think one of the things is that I think particularly for young people who tend to be very action oriented, and rather than wanting to be sit down and being spoken to, I remember as a youth worker, get out, do something with them. And I think that's probably true for all people, for young people more so. I think it starts with finding a way of doing something, because when you actually try something and you try and make a difference and it has an impact, that just changes you. And I think so one of the things is partly just get involved, get them involved and get stuck in. So I think my very good friend Stuart Keir is on this call. Stuart and I first got together and a long time ago, and we expressed both had an excitement about politics. But actually, one of the things that really cemented that relationship was in the wake of the Syrian refugee crisis in 2015, we needed to find ways of welcoming tens of thousands of refugees into this country, which we hadn't done for generations. And actually, we realized that the churches were probably the key to doing that really well and welcoming those very vulnerable families. So Stu and I managed to gather churches and NGOs and different organizations and community groups to just do that. And actually, it was a really hard job, but it was also incredibly exciting. We saw God do amazing things. We saw lives change, but we also saw churches change. The churches would always say, at the end of the process, that welcoming this one family has changed our church more than it has their family. We are sort of the beneficiaries of this as much as them. And so I think part of it is about identifying again, what is that opportunity which is God's gift to you right now? And rather than just sitting there thinking about it or worrying about it, bring people in and get active and do something with them. Because once they've seen actually God can work and make a difference in these areas, there's kind of no going back.
Wonderful. Let me throw a little bit of a hard ball at you, if you don't mind. You're there, and obviously your authenticity and your passion is coming through the computer screen. So really appreciate that. As you're there trying to do your part, and you're representing the kingdom and the body of Christ, the churches. What's the one thing you'd be tempted to think, man, I wish churches would do more of. I wish I could get more of this from churches. What's the one thing that if you could have a microphone to lead all the church leaders in England, you say, guys, I need this. What's the one thing from your perspective there at the cold face of politics you're thinking, I'd love for church to do more of this?
Well, it's a very big and hard question, and I'm not running away from it as a politician does, but I've just seen on the board that I'll need to get about 4 minutes because we're very, the House of Lords has lots of conventions about etiquette and politeness. And because you speak in a debate, you have to be at the beginning, at the end of the debate. And I can see that the shadow ministers are about to get up. And so I'm going to give you a ridiculously large answer to that challenging question. There is a major problem with the tone of our politics across the world. I don't know what the figures were for the last election we fought, but the election before last in the United Kingdom, the average female candidate or member of parliament received in excess of 50 rape threats alone on social media. That was every single one of them, and many of those are very real and worrying threats, which the police have to take obviously very seriously. So there's something about the tone of political debate and discourse at the moment which is really, really unhelpful. And I think one of the biggest things that the church can do at the moment is try to add to that debate. And I think we as Christians, it's about saying many of these issues are incredibly complicated. We're not just going to pile in with a soundbite on social media. We're genuinely going to try and have a conversation and bring people of different opinions together and work through what actually might be a godly and a Christian response to this. A friend of mine, Sam Wells, who wrote that book with me, was at a conference in America recently. And one of the pastors said to him, I've got a real problem because half my congregation are Democrat and half are Republican. And he said, that's brilliant. You've got them all in the same room. You're possibly the only place in town where those people come together. And actually, they come together and they receive Christ together through the Spirit. Now, what can you do with that? So I think there is a real challenge and an opportunity for the church to model a different type of politics and try and help us to do things in a different way and to have a much more considered debate about our public life rather than basically just throwing bombs at each other and insults at each other. That would be my biggie.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time.
No pressure.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
very
Russ,
much.
thanks so much. Praying for you in Parliament
Liam.
today. Thank you for all your contributions.
Sorry for messing you around, but thank you for all you're doing, guys. And please
you're
keep
good.
going. We desperately need you. Take care. God bless you.
Joy. Take care. Thank you. Jamie, why don't you stay on with us with Henry, just as we sort of continue some of our conversation here on faith in the public sphere. And Henry, obviously you've listened to Lord Rook, the new Lord in the House of Lords here in terms of a political position. And I think one of the things that's really interesting for me, certainly when I think about public life, is just how divisive Christianity and politics can be. So when you're thinking about in the way you're leading the people in your church context and in your movement of churches, how do you think Christians can best engage in the public sphere without being divisive and militant? Because sometimes there can be a public cry for something, or the public officer saying one thing, but Christians are like, we don't agree with this, and all of a sudden there's a fight or a clash in the middle. How do we lead our churches in a way that's not passive, but peaceful and also influential in that space?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty tricky question. And depending on the context in Europe or in America especially, what I've discovered is political parties or whoever's leading them, they come and they go. So I learned very early on that if I let my church or ministry be very much attached to a certain political party or group of people, then my half-life will be very small because once they disappear, I go with them. So I realized it's not very wise to do all I do through one particular party or one particular group of individuals, because politicians come and go very quickly. Number two, I try to train our people because most of them, they already have some particular gifting, talent, or influence in the society. So what I've learned to do is find what influences we already have in the church and then work with these influences so they can have a real, not just a religious, spiritual impact as such, but a real, measurable impact in the society. And that gives them a voice to come back and say, wait a minute, I'm doing this because I'm a Christian and I believe in Jesus. because of the impact that they have. So our whole ministry will grow it in a way that we acknowledge all the um, giftings and possibilities and that people have, enhance them, send them back to use them wherever they are. So most of the time, it's them engaging instead of me personally coming to them. And then once in a while, like during the war, our people were working with the police. During the war, there were so many police families falling apart. And so our people were working with the policemen, and they were having their families getting reunited. And so the police would say, "Where do you come from?" "Well, I'm from the Victory Church." And so eventually the head of the police department is looking for me to find out who am I, because I am basically catapulting these people into society to solve particular problems, but not affiliated with a political party, so to speak. And the third will be, we try not to be confrontational. I mean, the Bible says, overcome evil with good. So I try to train our people to be as good as they can. I mean, keep the good. Try to be as good as you can. Try to be smiling, but not confrontational. Don't burn up the abortion clinics, but help those doctors and the nurses. Maybe we can find a way to their hearts and help them to come to Christ, or at least understand the reason of why we want lives protected. So I always try not to be confrontational, especially don't join up with any group, so to speak. There are so many Christians that get swayed very quickly. And I try to make sure that our people don't join in, be swayed from the emotional hype and join in, but rather to pray, stay aside, and keep doing what you're doing. And eventually we can have more impact. Say when the Russians bombed a clinic here, it was a children's hospital. It was a few months ago. There was this children's hospital where a missile hit the hospital. And our people were right there 10 minutes after the bombing. And they were helping the kids. The reason why we went there, because the kids knew us. We were working with the kids before that. So when they saw our people, the kids were running to our people. So the government would say, wait a minute, let them go. And they tried to find out, who are these guys? From the Victory Church. And so I allow them to use what they have. I may not be able to work with the kids, but I help them to work with these kids. And now they had a greater impact than my preaching would do as far as the politics is concerned. So the good we do is much louder than the political position, so to speak. And we allow that good to give us the voice so people can listen to what we are saying.
I love the third part of that answer there, Henry. My next question, and in part you've answered this, but there are church leaders through Europe, and obviously context is king here. I get that, but there are church leaders through Europe who would say we need to keep politics and the church separate, or we need to keep the public sphere and the church separate. And yet, when we read scriptures, our heroes of scripture were politicians. They operated in the public office, didn't they? So how would you respond to somebody who's saying keep the public sphere and the church separate? What would you say?
I guess when the abolition of the slave trade happened, I think that will be, to me, the best example of everything. William Pitt was a politician. William Wilberforce was a preacher, so to speak. And they were working together. The one could influence the legislation, while the other could influence the spiritual life of the politician, all working together. I think it's very difficult to separate any human being from what God is doing. Politicians, non-politicians, they are people. And there's no way a church can separate itself from those people. So, number one, you cannot separate the church from the people. People and the church work together. Now, when you get into the institutions, the political institutions, that's a different thing altogether. That's where all the problems start. Do you bring the institution of the church to the institution of the parliament? Then that becomes a problem. But I try to find ways of engaging the people in the parliament rather than the whole parliament. Engage the people in the president's office rather than the president's office. So that way we stay relevant in politics, but not imposing the church institution on the government institution.
Wonderful. I'll try a question, Henry, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Again, just think about leadership and this whole theme of faith in the public sphere. We're always trying to get our church out in the street, engaging with the community, visible. I love, for example, what Russ Rook said there about, church with the sleeves up. How has that changed for you pre-war? I was going to say post-war, not yet in Jesus' name, but current war. And as a leader who's trying to demonstrate the love of God practically, what positives have you seen kind of have grown or come out of your people in the last 2 years because of the challenge you're going through?
I would mention that pre-war and during war, we haven't changed much. We changed some of the structures a little bit. Our whole concept of ministry is everybody in the church is a minister. That's number one. Number two, everybody has a gift, a talent, or something. And number three, we find your talent, your gift, and we help you develop it and then use it wherever you are. So, on the basis of that, when the war started, some of our people were working, they were doctors. Some of them are doctors. So, through them, we would come to the hospital to help the people that are wounded through the doctors. Some of them are soldiers. So we would go to the front lines and be chaplains to the soldiers at the front lines. Well, some of them work in the fire department. A missile comes in, everything is burning, and people are traumatized. Through them, we would go to the families who have lost their dear ones for comfort, tell them about Jesus. So I realized that the strategy of allowing everybody to develop what they have and use it in the public atmosphere has helped me when the war came to find a voice to speak to all these different public spheres that we have in the city. So sometimes our people have a louder voice with the politics, with the education system, with all kinds of system, medical system, more than I have. But through them, I amplify what I have here. So in the last 2 years, we've been able to work so closely with so many different groups. And one of the things that attracts them is that I don't use them as a marketing ploy. When they come to me for help, they will not see on Facebook that I'm trying to use them to get more likes, so to speak. I'm helping them for real. And they see that we are doing it for real. And the war is still going on, but this includes soldiers and non-soldiers, wives of soldiers, the orphans. The only thing I do very openly is when there are so many people who have died and there are so many orphans. So this one I do it very openly. Every 3-4 months, I gather the orphans whose fathers have died in the war. And my whole job is to hug these maybe 500, 600 orphans while we give them food, we do a dinner for them, do a small concert for them. I try to say some things that their father would have said to them so they can continue in life and feel some anchoring that somebody here is for me. So that one I do it very openly, because the only way I can get these orphans is from the government, because they have the list of these people. But otherwise, everything else we do, it helps people quite a bit. But the emphasis is, what gift do you have? What possibility do you have? Where do you have influence? We train you in the things of Christ, and you take what you have, the training, go into your sphere and bring the light. When a door opens, we come in and we help, and we add more people.
Wonderful. And that's it's encouraging and challenging that not much has changed in terms of your strategy. It's just bearing more fruit because of the current crisis that's happening there. But also challenging that, you know, as leaders, we're thinking about what are we doing to empower our people now. Thank you for that. Going back to what you said at the beginning about the multicultural aspect of your journey, which I loved, and found very funny, some of your jokes. You know, increasingly Europe's becoming multicultural. Increasingly, we're all part of churches or church movements that are planting churches in in each other's countries. And of course, part of the vision of E21 is we want to. It's European, and we will be sending people. People will be sent. Just talk a little bit about the multicultural side of things. Like, what did you find worked, both from personally, like you said, growing up in Zimbabwe, but also the church as a whole, kind of like Ireland. I get it. You know, when the church is mostly secular, everything's a sect. Over here, they call it a cult. You know, you're part of a cult. There's only two options in Ireland. There's Catholic, which is generally Irish, and there's Anglican, which is English, which is never a good thing here. And then everything else is a cult. So just give us some wisdom on how has the Lord blessed you, given you wisdom? How have you been impactful how have you grown and been impactful in the multicultural side of things? And as we think about growing the kingdom across Europe, what are two or three things you're like, man, these are musts, or these are definitely things that are points of wisdom worth considering?
I think I became wiser retrospectively. Initially, I was as dumb as can be. I mean, it was later on that I began to realize I accidentally did the right things. So, and I think that accidental moment is a very important one, because I think it's the Holy Spirit who was leading me. Now, when I stood in our church service, we were doing a conference. We had maybe 7,000 people. And I realized I was the only Black guy in the building. So I was saying, wait a minute, Victory Church is not multicultural. This is, this is not multicultural. Just the pastor is the wrong guy, but everybody else is at home. So that I was thinking, wait a minute, how did I get here? Where I'm standing on the platform, I have these 7,000 white people worshiping God. I'm preaching to them, and I'm the only Black guy in the whole building. So how did this happen? So going back to what I said at the beginning, I decided way before everything was big, but I will not be a Pentecostal charismatic without Pentecostal power. That was a very strong decision that I made. Being Pentecostal or charismatic, I have to show the Pentecostal power, because we are being mocked everywhere. Everybody's shouting at us. At least we should show some reality as far as that power is concerned. Sometimes I get accused of overemphasizing that, but I think that was very important. So when you have all these testimonies, all these people that have been set free, healed, delivered, come out of the hospital, and they're free of cancer, you can laugh at us, you can do whatever you want, but you cannot say these are not real. So that I realized was an absolute. It doesn't need any cultural adjustment, so to speak. The power of God will work in every culture. Then number two was I began to change a little bit to suit the culture, because I was riding against some headwinds. I mean, orthodoxy and also atheism. And so but also I'm an engineer. So I was analyzing the situation, finding ways of countering some of the problems that I met, and also being African. So that, I think that engineering part gave me the ability to strategize when I get into situations. And so strategizing is a very big part of our ministry. So I would say the power of God. And then number two will be the strategizing. If I know there's a place where they won't receive me, I would definitely find somebody they will receive and give him the tools, let him do it, and things will move well. And eventually we can move forward. I didn't have to do everything.
You have,
My biggest job
sorry,
was getting the people that could do the stuff and send them into those situations.
just on that, do you have like practical examples of what that looked like for you?
The strategizing.
Yeah, and some places where, like you said, you may not be the best person to interface with something.
Yeah, I have many of them, very many. I had one member of parliament. His helper was a member for a church, but he was not. And so this guy, he had a problem with his wife, and there were some big issues. So I counseled this assistant, please go to the member of parliament, do this, do that, and do this, and try to help them. So he went, he began to help him. The guy was so happy, things were changing. And then the member of parliament said, wait a minute, I've known you for many years. You are not as smart as you are sounding for the last 3 weeks. What happened to you? So eventually he said, well, Pastor Henry is helping me. And that's how I got to meet this member of parliament, and I got to help him. So I do that very, very often. And one of the things is when I grew up in Rhodesia, which became Zimbabwe, it was a segregated society where blacks and white were not together. Schools were separate, everything was separate. So I got used to the fact that when I need something from the other side, I could work through my friends and they can bring me what I want because I'm not allowed to get there. And if they need something from where I am, they can ask me and I can help them. And it kind of lived in me. So I've been using it all the time.
Well, I think it's tremendously helpful because sometimes we can look at these challenges like, how do I influence, for example, off the back of Lord Rook, who is here, how do I have a voice in that arena? And we just disqualify ourselves too quickly because I'm this, I'm uneducated, I'm black, I'm white, I'm whatever. Versus like what you're saying, where has God given me a connection? How do I leverage that to be a person of influence? If I empower them and train them to be a person of influence on the ground, maybe I'm not the one impacting the public sphere in that sense, but I am supporting the person that is. I think I talk to a lot of leaders about just being involved in the community, involved in local society. A lot of times people just quickly disqualify themselves because, here's the excuse, here's why I can't, here's why it won't work. So I love the idea of, the Spirit's power, is what you said, was in terms of like effective multicultural church planting and ministry, but also strategy, and trying to, influence our society through people, through the local context, which I think is very good. Did you have a third one, or is that?
Number 3 will be do something tangible that people can say, oh, this is what they did. This is what they did. This is what they do. When you have something tangible that you help the society with, that's very powerful. In Ukraine, people needed lots of hope, especially during the war. I mean, a lady, she lost her husband and her father the same morning. The Russians shot the father and the husband in their backyard in the morning, 9 a.m. And so what does she need? There's nothing I can give her except maybe to pray with her, hug the kids, cry with them. And that is an impact that stays with that family. So that's on a one-on-one level. But also on the societal level as well, we try to do something that impacts the people. Like the kids after the hospital was bombed, many of the doctors have come to church ever since because they saw how we helped those kids. Something tangible that we did. So it's on every sphere. We try to make sure our church to reach as many different spheres as possible, but according to the giftings that God has given us when the people came to church. So do something tangible that the people can relate to. That will help quite a lot.
Henry, thank you so much for your input, your time and input today. And in a few moments' time, I'm going to ask everybody on the call to unmute themselves, and we're going to pray for you all in our home languages for 1 minute. We're going to do that. And then in response, Henry, I would love for you to pray for all of us, that we would not only just be aware of the need to be involved in the public sphere, but also that God would release something in all of our ministries and churches that would cause and compel young people, but people of all ages, to rise up and understand there's a part that God wants them to play in public office. So we're going to do that in just a few moments' time. Just give you a chance just to mute yourself there for a minute, Henry. Take a breath for a moment. Jamie, thanks for being involved in the calls and in the question and the interviewing. Brilliant as always there. I want to take a moment to bring onto call Stefan for a moment, just while we're sort of getting ready to pray for Henry and pray for the people of the Ukraine. Stefan, we're going to spotlight you. And mate, I wonder if you could just take a moment to share with us a little bit about the Pentecostal World Conference that's coming up in a few months' time. In June in Helsinki. I know you've been working really hard to be involved in that and preparing that and putting that together. So just share with us just for a moment with you on that.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn. Just Henry, what you mentioned, I just want to add to that, or to comment on that, to influence the people, that to look for the people that already have the influence in the different spheres. It really keeps us from having everything that we do as a church like another outreach or trying to influence, but to find the people that already are there. I think that was one of the key elements to what you said, and I so much appreciate you for that. Go and Make conference. When we started the planning this conference for 4 years ago, the world was a different place, actually. And during the years we have planned, the world has really changed. Europe has really changed, and what we have heard from you, Henry, we couldn't believe when we started to plan. But right from the beginning of the planning, this team Go and Make has just it just came to us, and to see where the world is right now. We feel that this team is really prophetic. When I hear Jean-Luc talking about the fire DNA of evangelism that is spreading around Europe, and hearing us as church leaders trying to find ways to make disciples of all nations, to combine these two elements, to the going and the making, is really a prophetic tone and a prophetic emphasis that will really affect and will really have the spotlight during these days in Helsinki, in the ice hockey arena in Helsinki. And of course, I cannot leave this presentation without saying that Finland was voted yesterday for the 8 years in a row as the happiest country in the world. So if you lack some happiness in your life, just join us, and you will recognize why. You have a great discount code on the screen here now that you can use to get a special price for this. And we say, I want to emphasize that also, we say to everyone, every leader, don't come alone. Come together as church leadership. Spend a few days in Helsinki and really be impacted by this. I really think also, I shared that earlier today, that we as the people of God, as the Pentecostal charismatic people around the world, are gathering in Europe at this time, that is really prophetic. To come together and show there is not only darkness, there's not only wars and devastation, there's a people of God that really stands together and comes together in Europe at this time, proclaiming the good news and are ready to go and make. The conference is twofolded. It will be a really inspirational conference. You will go home, of course, happy since you have been in Finland, but also inspired, full of faith that God is on the move in Europe at this time. We hear the reports, and we are going to gather also the reports during the conference. But for us, inspiration is not enough. We want also to be equipped. Jean-Luc will have workshop for evangelism. We will hear the Nobel Peace awarded from the Panzi Hospital in Congo. Denis Mukwege will sit together, be interviewed on the value of a human being in the midst of everything that we are experiencing there. There are so many great speakers coming together, but it will also be a place for networking together, for praying together, to feel in the week of Pentecost, to feel the presence of the Holy Spirit that will empower us to get this work done. I think this will be a great day of inspiration and equipping. So join us in Helsinki, 4th to 7th of June in the ice hockey arena in the beautiful summer Helsinki, and we will have really, really great days. Let's stand together in this. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Stefan. So it's www.pwc2025.fi, and this discount has been released to us today that we are able to release with you. So thanks, Stefan, for that, and look forward to seeing you all there. The first ever Pentecostal World Conference was actually held in Zurich in Switzerland in, I think, 1947 or just after World War II anyway. And the first one I got connected in was in 2017, I think it was, when it was in Singapore, and Seoul, Korea, again, 3-4 years ago. So it is an amazing time. Just great to be together, really, with a global Pentecostal family, to hear from different perspectives. Stefan, we do have a question in chat saying, will it be in multiple languages? Are the translations available? What does that look like for the conference?
Yeah, we are translating. So the stage language will be English. We are translating, of course, to Finnish, Swedish, to English, to French, to German, to the Spanish language, and yeah, it will be arranged through a conference app in a really, really professional way. So we will have that working very well.
Great. Well, listen, I've done 1,811 days on Duolingo in Spanish, so if I can help out, I can tell everyone that the brown cow is driving the blue tractor to the farmer's market. So that might be helpful at some point.
Yeah, we will hire you.
Okay, thanks for that, buddy. Stuart, we're just going to bring you in quickly. We're going to pray for Henry in a moment's time and pray for the Ukraine. But Stu, just tell us a little bit about Catania coming up later on in the year when we go to Sicily.
Yeah,
E21.
Yeah, love hearing from Stefan there about Pentecostal World. That's sort of the extended family. But when we're getting the E21 Europe family together, this is where we gather. This is where we talk really directly into the lives of us as leaders, how we lead and shape our churches, how we lead and shape our leadership teams so that we can impact and make a difference. And you can see the dates there, 4th to the 6th of November. Please make sure you get those in. We're thrilled to be going back to Catania, to being back with Pastor Enzo and his team. They are brilliant, brilliant hosts. You're going to learn a lot about how to run church just by watching Pastor Enzo and his team, and how to look after people well so that they feel valued when they come to church. Just by attending, you'll learn that, let alone the sessions. They're going to unpack so much more. So we'd love you to be there with us. You can see the dates, 4th to the 6th of November. We'll be sending out options on hotels, places you can book into. And Pastor Enzo says the earlier you book, the sooner he starts cooking, and he is super excited about it. We're going to have a great time together. We'd love to see you all there.
Excellent. Thanks, Stuart. Appreciate that. Yeah, make sure you look out for that and book in for that. We'll send you all the information that you need, and give you sort of the direction of travel for the sessions, the theme. There's going to be lots of table time, lots of conversation around tables, discussion time, and relationship building as well, which is something we really feel is important. Obviously, E21 is, we are the Spirit-empowered church. We're Pentecostal, and so we are going to take an offering today as well. And so we're going to put up a Zoom link for you all, which is going to have a link, a QR link for you to be able to give in an offering right now. We want to be able to, sow generously into Lord Rook, into the time, and also into the ministry that he has there, into the House of Lords. Obviously, we're all standing with the Ukraine in many ways as well, and have been over an extended period of time. So if you don't mind, just taking a moment right now, let's give in faith. I know that in Europe, there's definitely a breakthrough coming in giving, in this idea of the spirit of generosity and what that looks like. And so we always want to make sure that we're creating the opportunity for us as a group of leaders to give, not to pay, but to give. And there's a big difference between paying and giving. And so would you just take a moment to click the QR code? It'll take you to a place where you can put in an offering that we're able to sow into what Lord Rook is doing there in Parliament, and representing really the church. And that will be absolutely brilliant. Thank you for taking the time to do that. Really been praying for Europe of late. I've been watching the news and watching what's taking place, certainly in the public sphere, looking at what's taking place in different government regimes in the different countries through Europe. And I know that there's some exciting days ahead for us all as we continue to lead the church in the public sphere. We are in our local church here in Manchester, the new mayor of our city. She was brought in as the mayor in May last year, May 2024. And her term of office there as mayor has been really significant. She has been in our church for 10, 11, 12 years, and it's been amazing to watch her walk the space that she's in, sort of representing God in the public office. That has been a real great joy. And my prayer for each and every one of you is that you would continue also to see people in your local churches really rising up and representing the Lord in the public office, in public sphere. So that will be great. So thank you for that, everybody. Thank you for being a part of this giving moment and sowing into everything that we are doing here. We're going to do two things to close today. We're firstly going to all unmute and pray in our home language, native language, for the Ukraine. We want to pray for Bishop Henry. And this is going to sound like a wall of noise right now, okay? As we all speak up and pray loud. You can speak in tongues, you can do whatever you want to do, but let's not use this as a time to be silent. Let's use it as a time to really pray. One of the things that I know is that Henry right now, as we pray, is going to be encouraged in his spirit. But more than that, we offer these prayers to the Lord, don't we? And he's able to take all of our native tongues. He's able to take all languages and process it all at the same time. And I believe that the weight of all of our prayer for the next minute or two will count a lot in terms of the Lord bringing peace to the nation of the Ukraine, and also to the people who are hurting and broken in that nation right now as a result of the war. So we're going to do that. Once you hear everything being muted, then at that point, we're going to unmute Bishop Henry, and we're going to ask Henry to pray over all of us